organizations are approaching Musk era Twitter or X and how we're migrating to similar platforms. I will say that this has been, alongside AI, one of the hardest areas to keep up with, because every few days it seems like there's a new platform cropping up with a slightly different set of features. And I've tried a few of the platforms and I'm having trouble keeping up. So I'm really excited to be joined by experts in the field of social media and digital strategy. So we'll start with a round of introductions and then just have a discussion about how we are all approaching this fairly confusing time in the social media landscape. So I'll go ahead and start. I'm Salim. I live in Oakland, California, and I have been doing digital strategy for progressive causes since 2011. I worked with Brad on the Obama 2012 campaign, where he was one of my bosses and mentors. I worked on the Hillary 2016 campaign, government and nonprofits, campaigns up and down the ballot, and lots of consulting for organizations and causes. I've run a lot of Twitter accounts in my day. I felt like I knew that platform pretty well, and I don't know what to do in this new environment. But I just founded my own boutique firm to help organizations tackle digital strategy broadly and build long-term capacity. And I'm excited to, utilize the discussion here today to help me be a better digital strategist. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to people who are appearing next in my boxes. Earl, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and give us just a minute on your experience with social media.
Great. So Earl Dos Santos, pronouns he, him. I also come from the Bay Area. And have been working in the political advocacy space since 2018. I was part of that wave of people who came after Trump was elected. While my background was mainly tech and paid ads and so on, when I first got into the space, I kind of I don't know if meandered or just through luck kind of found a little niche helping people at bigger platforms like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, find better ways to use their platform to drive action and awareness. So a number of our campaigns have been on Twitter, and I've been watching kind of sadly how it's been changing, but I'm excited to talk about that and more platforms along with all of you.
Thanks, Earl. Alana.
Hi, Ilana Levin, my pronouns they, them. I am program director at New Media Mentors. We are the educational partner of Netroots Nation. My own background dates back to 2005, which was, right before even before Netroots Nation was even yearly coast. I am part of that sort of first generation of people who were doing digital in the nonprofit space back when it was blogs, etc. were new. And I've worked predominantly in the labor movement and in community-based organizations. And through all of that, I've always been a trainer because we had to figure things out. There was no one else to go to. So now I'm able to lead training work full-time at New Media Mentors. And I'm definitely a Twitter super user, as well as someone who literally teaches people how to use those tools. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Alana. Casey, over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey O'Brien. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I recently relocated here from DC, and I'm the director of social media and texting at Middle Seat. I actually got my start in digital through Salim, who told me that digital was the future and that it would always be around and changing and fun. And so excited to dig into how fun it is today on the Hillary campaign where we work together. I also have worked on a number of different campaigns. Now I work at Middle Seat on large social media accounts. We work with both progressive organizations as well as members of Congress, senators, a lot of different campaigns. So the whole sort of gamut of different size. Obviously, Twitter is super important for all of them and has been a huge part of our work. I feel like a huge part of my life for so long. So I'm really excited to dig in today and talk a little bit more and hear what other folks are thinking on this as well.
Thank you, Casey. Rashad, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Salim, and thank you, Brad, for organizing this summit. I think you just do an amazing work in getting all us practitioners together and recalibrate and rethink and reflect on all the disruptions that's been going on in our world. And big honored to be on this session with Casey, Earl, and Lana and Salim. In terms of my background, I joke, I say I'm a internet grandpa by through internet years. By my entry point into this world was 2003, 2004, Howard Dean's campaign. Back then it was web, before new media and before digital. And yeah, so I've been around, and I'm based in Bay Area. My pronouns are he, him, his, by the way. I'm based in Bay Area in Pacifica, California, and I have my own boutique firm as well that does focus on public affairs, but advising and counseling on strategic comms and how social media plays into it is a big part of it. In terms of it's been interesting to see what's been happening. I've always been somebody who like to try out new things, and that went for Twitter in 2008, 2009. 2009, I was working as a leadership aide in the U.S. Senate at that time, and I had to work very closely with the Republicans, Mitch McConnell's leadership staff, and Senate Rules Committee to make sure that all U.S. senators had both official accounts and campaign accounts, and worked Senate rules to change it. So that was 15 years ago, and to see the dramatic changes in the landscape has been interesting, and I feel I'm really excited to have the conversation today, because I think a lot of the notes about all these different platforms are going to be, in my opinion, going to be very similar to a lot of the experiences that we were having at that time, which was at that time was time for innovation, but in contrast, right now it feels like a more time for disruption, but a lot of the same dynamics apply. So excited to have this conversation.
Thank you, Mirshed. And yeah, I said we had some experts on the call. Now you know just how much expertise there is. Oh, it's a lot. So let's start with the really big question we are all grappling with, one that pains me, honestly, getting my start doing social media on Twitter. But how are y'all navigating saying goodbye or staying on X and staying there in opposition to it, but still utilizing the reach and everything, going silent on it, trying out these new platforms? How are you advising people you're training or working with, or how are you personally navigating the landscape we're currently in? I will say for myself, I think I've retweeted like a few people in the last few months when they've asked me to, but I'm trying out Blue Sky, I'm trying out Threads. They don't have the same massive audience and the same functionality, so that's why I'm excited to learn from y'all. So who wants to kick us off on answering this big question of how we're tackling these new platforms and saying goodbye to X or staying on? Alana, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
I do think it's important for us to not call it by the name of an LA punk band from the 80s. It's Twitter. And like Elon Musk doesn't get to change the language that we use in the world. And like, it's just not cool. But what I've been telling folks, and what's been true of me, is if the people that you're seeking to target or mobilize are still on Twitter, then it makes sense for you to still be there. But you should be planning for a future in which it does not exist. You can't rely on it to be there for you. You know, he's like not even staffing it to function, so it could crumble tomorrow. But I don't believe whether or not a community-based nonprofit in Des Moines is using their Twitter account is going to determine whether or not the platform succeeds or fails. And if that local nonprofit is using that account to communicate with local reporters in a meaningful way, or to reach people who are living in their community but don't really follow the nerdiness of the issues they work on, then it's valuable for them to still be there. So this is certainly not the time to get on it if you're not already there. But if your organization is finding utility, and it's probably less utility than it was, but for the groups I'm working with, it is still some utility. There's still, we're there for now, but certainly don't let that guy have your credit card number. Like, don't buy ads, don't do Twitter Blue, you know, it could be sold, you know, who knows, like your credit information is insecure, like don't even do that. But I don't believe in leaving things as a protest. It's just not.
Yeah, it's kind of, I remember the debate around whether or not we should engage with super PACs back in 2012. And obviously we did, and that was important. It's like, we need every tool at our disposal to fight fascism. Casey, go ahead.
I tend to agree with Lana. I think that our audience, that press, all of us, like we're all on Twitter. You're just not going to get that sort of reach on any of these other platforms, even like, Instagram, not taking threads out of it, and Facebook. Like, sure, we were all on Facebook, but we're not all getting on it every day in the same way that everyone in our space gets on Twitter to get their news and scrolls and spends a lot of time there. I think it's just how we communicate. And I think there will come a point where it does crumble, and we as like a progressive movement and like the larger like political industry will have to decide like where do we move. But I'm sure that a lot of other industries will have to have that same conversation. For me personally, I have not been using my Twitter. I've actually been locked out of my Twitter since they like changed the once they changed the two-factor. I immediately got locked out, and I've been on this ongoing email Twitter support to Twitter Gov to Twitter support to Twitter Gov for a couple of months. So I just have like taken that as my personal moment to be like, I don't need this, but all of our clients obviously use it. So yeah, I think, and we can get more into this, but the more roadblocks that they put up, like making it more difficult to use Sprout Social, or all of the strides we've made in like social media management, putting TweetDeck behind a paywall, like that for me, that was how I use Twitter mostly because I love my lists. So I think the more roadblocks they put up, the harder they make social media managers' jobs. In addition to just all of the ethical points on this, I think will also be like a big consideration in addition to the audience.
Indeed, being the guy who had TweetDeck up in my second screen was like a core part of my identity that is gone now.
I do remember that. Yeah, the huge screen of just TweetDeck.
Earl, Merced, go ahead.
Or Earl can go ahead. It's okay.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, first of all, I think I may have mentioned this before, but I mean, what greater show of how strong network effects are than the fact that like Twitter is still, around and humming despite all the mismanagement of Elon and what he's done, and even like, changing the brand and all this type of thing. I mean, I think it just goes to show with these type of platforms, what kind of power they have once they get everyone on there. But I would definitely echo a couple things. I mean, one, I wouldn't tweet unless you have a really good reason to, because we all know that that's how these platforms make their money. You're giving them just free content to run ads against and all that type of thing. But the fact of the matter remains, I mean, at least in my experience, last year in my work with some people with bigger platforms, I mean, we had more than 3 campaigns that raised, several $100,000, and almost all of it, I mean, maybe not almost all, but the majority of it came through Twitter, because there just are still big audiences who care about politics, and that's where you can like tap into the rapid response, moment and so on. So I don't think it makes sense to leave completely. You can kind of like pin a tweet saying, find me somewhere else, but in key moments, be ready to use it, because there's still people who go there to find out what to do.
Yeah, I would pretty much echo what Casey, Earl, Lana, Salim, you all have said, and I will emphasize it. I've told folks, do not, in all caps, delete your Twitter account. Do not give it up. It's something that you have worked to build, however time that you have put in. I understand the frustration and what this guy has done to this platform. But that said, do not give up your space and let somebody else take it. So that's one. But I also have said, I'm also telling folks that it's okay to really downgrade your engagement. It's I don't use it as much as I used to. At the end of the day, it really comes back to strategy, right? And substance, in terms of what is it that you need to get out, whether it's a small organization in Iowa or it's a national organization based in one of the big cities. At the end of the day, you will need to have a communications plan, and your communications plan will involve engaging reporters, and a lot of the reporters are still there. So what I tell people is, use it as a broadcast medium. Use it as a medium where you are essentially, you're going to do a press release or write a memo or whatnot. It's going to be up on your website, and you're not, it's going to be malpractice if you have a Twitter account and you do not push it out, because you will want to make sure that it hits all the touch points. But that said, what it's no longer there, or it has really degraded, is the sense of community. Twitter really is not the community what it used to be circa 2008, 2009, the early years, part of the 2010 decade. You know, a lot of the goodwill is gone. It's very toxic. There's a lot of showmanship in terms of how folks are using that product. So keep that in mind. But I think that's where there is some utility in some of the new platforms that are emerging, whether that's Blue Sky or Mastodon or Threads or even LinkedIn. To a certain extent, it's a different world, right, than it was even 2 years ago. There are some communities that are forming there, and depending on what bandwidth you have in your team for your clients, the social media manager, if it's a 1-person team, 3-person team, or whatnot, there is definitely utility in rebuilding and also building new communities and those platforms. I see that as an opportunity. I mean, at the end of the day, when I started campaigning, whether it's in the Dean campaign or before that, I'm an organizer at heart. I really feel like getting people together and using tools available to get good-natured, good faith people together so we can enact changes that we want to enact. And in that sense, I know it may sound frustrating. It's like, oh man, I have to do it all over again. I think there's utility in building communities in other places, despite their imperfections. And a couple of other points that I will make is, and I know we'll probably get into it, obviously each new platform has its own disadvantages. You know, you may not be able to put in video or embed GIFs or GIF, I don't know, you know, one of those. Or places like Mastodon, you can code post or blog code. There's that, but people forget how basic Twitter looked in 2008 or 2009. We couldn't even use link shortener, automatic link shorteners. We had to use Bitly and go and shorten the links and make sure it fit in 140 characters, right? The link previews wouldn't show up, so we had to screenshot pictures of the article. So we went through this growing pains then. So I think it's okay if some of the other places that you go to growing pains and figure out. And the last thing that I for now I will say is, while you engage in Twitter, keep your presence. I have a feeling it's gonna happen. What's gonna happen to it's very similar way what has happened to Facebook, right? I think Facebook 5 years ago, 7 years ago was a very robust place, right? People would talk about politics, get into arguments of like 40 common threads or whatnot. But now, for me personally, it's a very different experience. My Facebook is pretty much all pictures of my friends' kids and cats and dogs, which is okay. That's algorithm I've curated, but it's a very different Facebook experience I'm having in 2020, 2024, 2023 than I did in 2012 or 2015 or 2016. It's a dramatically different place, and it's not as politically potent that I feel like as it was in those years. And I think Twitter is probably headed that way, but notwithstanding, folks should stay engaged there strategically.
Thank you, Murshad. And yeah, that's a nice segue to my next question for all of you, which is, to what degree have you explored Mastodon, Threads, using LinkedIn more as a Twitter replacement? Substack's notes feature, which I think came on the scene and then fizzled out maybe a little bit quickly. And there's plenty of others I haven't even heard of, I think. And, you know, part of the context I think that we should all focus on is like Threads. The founder of Instagram and Threads came out, not founder, but current CEO, came out saying that politics wasn't really the focus of Threads. And all of us here are using these platforms to try to drive real, actual progressive change and a better future. So with that context in mind, which of these platforms, if any, does it make sense to really spend some time on? If you have any examples of success, also want to hear anything there. Alana, I'll kick it to you.
You can see I'm like, so, I mean, I think it's important for your organization to have an account on all of those platforms so that nobody else takes your name, even though it's something like Mastodon, because there's an endless number of servers, hypothetically, there could be an impersonator at a random one. It's important to have an account in every place. I think though, if you're an organization or person who is good at Twitter and who uses Twitter in part to have policy conversations with other nerdy people, talk about culture, or speak to progressive journalists, then Blue Sky is becoming a good place for that. And I can point to, the most, I feel bad calling something viral, but like, frankly, viral like post I had there was about COVID. Like, it's not a place where people are just posting about bunnies. But I think like and I think the skills that you've developed to tweet will serve you well on Blue Sky. I have not been as active on the others. And in fact, I continue to not find what I'm looking for on Mastodon, even though on an emotional level, of course, I'd rather Mastodon be the thing. But I like literally just, I'm not seeing who I'm looking to speak to, or when I'm speaking, the engagement. And I think that the migration of people from Twitter to Blue Sky of a certain Twitter head type made it so that the community is very continuous from one space to the other. Yeah. But I'm not seeing nonprofits very active in that space yet. My personal policy officially though, is if I see a nonprofit or elected official who is even like vaguely on our side, I will follow them because I want to encourage engagement to be there. So.
Cool, thanks, Alana. Anyone else want to contribute to this conversation around the specifics of the platforms? Casey, go ahead.
I do not like Mastodon. I cannot wrap my head around it. It is just, it's a lot, and I want simple, and I understand Twitter when we first started using it was also not great, but I just think when we're talking about like the reason what made Twitter successful, it was like accessibility, right? Like you could just get on, make an account, follow a bunch of people. Most people were not on private. There was no like invite only system that was set up that you had to, it wasn't like some exclusive site when, Twitter like picked up. And I think if we look at a lot of the viral moments of the past 2 election cycles on the political like campaign side, a lot of that is just because everybody was on Twitter and it wasn't like some like a niche sort of just like everyone just in, one lane. That's for that reason, I tend to like Threads because when you have created your account, you have sort of that built-in audience on Instagram that you're bringing over. But I see the challenge there being that like a lot of people haven't really actually invested in Instagram. And because they spend so much time professionally on Twitter, they're not really working on building out sort of that Instagram following. We've also tried to park handles for clients, and that is also our recommendation. But I think trying to build up your just Instagram and Facebook generally, if you're trying to reach real people, is what I recommend. Just because I think like if there wasn't a time before to sort of pivot and start thinking outside of Twitter, it's now. And we try to tell people like Twitter's not really where real people are. So if you're trying to engage with voters and like the general public, you should be focusing on those platforms. So I think to me, it's like less like, is there a Twitter alternative, and more like, can we start putting more content out and engaging more on the platforms that we're already on?
That makes a lot of sense. Earl, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I've tried, Mastodon and Blue Sky and Post, and I mean, none of them have got me to the point where where I had been with Twitter, where I would say the main 2 reasons why I use Twitter are, one, similar to you, Salim, keep up with the news. I was a big fan of TweetDeck, and it's been hard to, not pay for Twitter Blue because I lost that, but I've stayed strong on that. And yeah, I mean, to reach a community, I mean, a meaningful number of people in the niche that you care about. And yeah, at least for me, maybe Blue Skies has changed a bit since I tested it out, but I wasn't seeing that. And so it just wasn't enough for me to jump in it. I will I know this is a little unrelated to the question, but one interesting nugget that I've seen, and I know kind of we're all in the political world, is I'm also part of like some creator communities and so on, and they like a lot of them are still having a good experience on Twitter, believe it or not. So maybe it's also good to just keep that in mind, that it's all about context, and it may not be a bad platform for everyone right now, which is maybe also why it's been hard for there to be like a wholesale change to another alternative.
Just to jump in on that point, but my friends who work in other industries like sports or music don't know, like, this conversation is probably something that they're not even thinking about. So I think that's like a really great point, Earl, because I've brought it up to some social friends in different spaces, and they're like, yeah, it's gotten harder, but I think maybe because they're not thinking of the Elon of it all. I don't know. It's an interesting point.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go. I would say I have been heavily using pretty much all the platforms, Blue Sky, Mastodon, Threads. I really fully believe in, for myself as a practitioner, just diving right in and trying it all. I think I probably put up hundreds of posts in on Blue Sky already, and also Mastodon. And I agree about a lot of the clunkiness around Mastodon. Those are real barriers to make it to have it scale, right? But that said, it's been interesting. I have found a lot of success using that platform on certain issues. I work a lot around issues to Supreme Court reform, taking on this court, and Mastodon is filled with law professors, lawyers, or practitioners who enjoy bigger, I think it's like 540, 550 characters or whatnot, and they can be more substantive in their content. So I've done a lot of A/B testing in terms of putting the exact same post in all four platforms, and I always get more engagement on the Mastodon stuff on issues on Supreme Court, issues that impact the LGBTQ plus community. It's a massive community there. So it's been useful there. I think Blue Sky, Lana is exactly right. A lot of reporter types, writers are already there. So I think the vibe there is very much like Twitter circa 2009. It's fun. I think that's where sometimes you can be comfortable offering some of your spicier takes on policy and try things out, which frankly is not safe for somebody like me. Because I don't have time to deal with Nazis. I just don't have time to deal with white supremacists in my mentions and get into arguments. It's inefficient use of my time. So if I'm trying out new takes on policies and I want to see what somebody like David Dayen would respond with, or Brian Beutler would respond with me, it has huge utility. I think Thread is really elegant. It's a very very smooth looking platform, but one of the main issues, it's so algorithm driven. So it's a lot of times it's just brand stuff that comes up. But that said, it is useful to a certain extent. But also, Thread is essentially, I see it as what Facebook was in 2010, 2011. It's a lot of the conversation that I used to have on Facebook timeline is just in Threads, and a lot of times they're actually my family members who have just turned their Instagram accounts into Threads accounts, and it's just sort of a different crowd. But that I also, in terms of the main use of Twitter, I think it's interesting. Earl and Casey mentioned sports and culture. I probably spend most time on Twitter only on weekends these days, because I'm watching Premier League, college football, and NFL. I have my Twitter lists of like Manchester United, where I'm following about 150 reporters, writers. That's when I watch games. I have that on my iPad, just so I see what's happening. Same thing when I'm watching UCLA. I have my list of 150 people that I follow. And that community is still there, but we will see. All communities are also extremely factionalized as well. I know the universe who follows UCLA sports is going to be very different than the universe that follows sports in a school from Southeast, like Mississippi, Ole Miss. They're gonna it's going to be very, very factionalized and fragmented, and you'll have to figure out where it makes sense to engage. But right now, in terms of sports and entertainment, Twitter is still there. It has not diminished globally.
One of the wilder things I've seen is that disability justice and COVID justice activists are very active on Twitter still. And despite the fact that this is a site that's been a primary venue for both COVID minimizing, ableist harassment and dissemination of disinformation. And part of it, I think, is like people wanting to be where that bad stuff is to counter it. But I also think a lot of it is for people who are limited in their time and energy about being elsewhere. People have been burned by the next platform concept so many times that they're not going to put time and energy into a new space. So I do, I follow a disability justice feed in Blue Sky, for example. But when I go back on Twitter, the people are all still talking about, vaccine access and things like that, on Twitter, despite like that being such a hostile place to have those conversations. It's pretty wild.
Interesting. I'll go ahead, Earl.
But to be clear, that's largely individuals, not organizations, because there are not many organizations who even care about that issue. So I don't know if it would be different if there was more organizational infrastructure.
I was just going to say, I know it's going to be probably no platform is going to, replace Twitter in the next year. Of course, you never know. But I think a sleeper pick for having more influence is Substack. They hired someone just to, they are definitely investing in political coverage. They hired someone who I talked to last week who, is just focused on supporting political writers and content and so on for the election. So yeah, I'm going to be keeping an eye on that and potentially investing more myself.
I think it's important for people to know that Substack was funding transphobic writers, which like obviously Twitter is like run by an anti-Semite, like and a transphobe. Like it's not like any of these are good, but I often find people aren't aware about Substack, whereas we all kind of know what's up with Twitter.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'm also on Substack and I'm trying that out, but I would be very, very careful about investing your time and your intellect and your writing that is going to be primarily hosted on a platform that you own. Because the way it is set up, Substack is set up right now, it's working really well for some elite writers. A lot of them tend to be white and male. And it is what it is. I'm just keeping it real at this point. But Substack Notes is again very, very, very elegant feature. But I would, you should park your handle there and maintain a presence. But in terms of going too heavy on it, you should be cognizant of what the platform is and who else is using it. In addition to the transphobic writers, I think there's some extreme right-wing folks that are being promoted and platformed there as well. So it's something to be very cognizant about before you give your own time, intellect, and content over that platform.
It does seem like there's a lot of choosing between the lesser of all evils in these discussions, though not every platform falls into that category, and many of them do. One thing I just want to underscore really firmly that I think everybody has really given voice to so far in the conversation is that Your mileage is going to vary on all these platforms depending on what you've done and what your current capacity is and the audiences you're trying to reach. But you know best, and your results speak for themselves. And if you're still finding utility in Twitter, or if you're finding new utility in these other platforms, that's awesome, and you should keep pursuing that. And it's all about achieving our goals ultimately. So if you're able to do that through any of the platforms, you shouldn't stop just necessarily. We could definitely spend a lot of time talking about the laundry list of horrible things that have happened on Twitter and that Musk has done to Twitter. But I think it might be more fun to reflect on what Twitter was and how it might inform the future of social media and all these new platforms. And so I thought it could be fun to just ask everybody to go around sharing a favorite memory they have from Twitter, and how, if it connects to the new platforms cropping up and what you hope to see as they all compete for our eyeballs and compete to be the number 2 to Facebook and Insta, or TikTok, or number 3 to TikTok, I suppose. I'd love to hear your memories. And I will start. I don't have a specific memory, but I have connected with dozens and dozens, maybe even over 100 people that I met on Twitter at first, and then met them in real life at a conference or a training or some other event. And there's like this beautiful moment where you're like, wow, I really love what you share online. And now I'm meeting you in person, and I feel like I know a little about you, and I know how important you are to the progressive movement. And it's just so cool to like already know you a little bit, and now to meet you and know you in real life. And like Merched is a person I've met very few times in real life, but I followed on Twitter for a decade and understand his political views. And I've gained a lot following him on the internet. So that's the thing I miss most in this current social media ecosystem. Memories, reflections. We can keep the order going, Ilana, if you want to kick us off.
The things that I really excite me are things that could only happen on Twitter, because it is where we are and our targets are. And what frightens me about what's coming next is if our targets aren't in the same place as we are, then we can't target them. By examples, my favorites would be things like when we took over the Ask JP Morgan hashtag, 2012, JP Morgan is like, we're having a Q&A session. And the left organized and was like, yeah, you're literally making people homeless. Can you do something about that? Or like asking them about their various thefts and crimes. And the Q&A was canceled. Like Jamie Morgan was like, I guess we're not doing this Q&A. And it got business news press. Similarly, 2014, the New York Police Department was like, tell us about hashtag my NYPD. And boy, do New Yorkers have a lot of things to tell them about their racist NYPD. So just all these hashtag takeovers were so powerful, but only possible because the people we're targeting, the powers we're targeting are there. And they're going to choose not to be there on the other platforms, quite possibly. We do also see moments of collective organizing on it, like with vaccinations. People have used Twitter to help crowdsource where to get vaccinated from each other. And that is something that can happen regardless of whether or not our targets show up where we were going to be.
Thank you, Ilana. That made me remember one actual story I do want to share, which people probably remember from 2020 when BTS fans were able to troll Trump magically and book a bunch of tickets to his venue. And then he was at a totally empty stadium because BTS fans organized on Twitter and trolled the hell out of him. That was a really beautiful moment. And as a BTS fan, I'd love to see it. Casey, go
ahead. I love all these moments. I feel like it makes me nostalgic for when hashtags had like more power. It kind of reminds me of early on in my career working with Salim, where we were working in Ohio and we were trying to get people to tweet about early voting, and all of these like beautiful stories came up because there were so many people who were so like inspired to go vote for like the first potential woman president, and seeing like people voting with their families. It ended up being like such a nice like content sharing moment where we could just tie a nice bow on it and like find all of the content too, in addition to having a bunch of people on the ground distributing the content. And then a recent moment, this is maybe not Kennedy, but I think like the virality of the crudité moment from Dr. Oz and the Fetterman campaign. I think like while that was attacking someone, I think just seeing how people responded online and just the funny takes and just how witty people can be, and how everyone was sort of piling on. I don't think that moment and a lot of what the Fetterman campaign did through Twitter, like I don't think that we could replicate that in the current Twitter state. I think Twitter really drove a lot of that, and they utilized it as a communications tool in a way that campaigns haven't in the past. And I thought that was really just like magical to watch and just really fun. Like trolling is what brings people together more than trolling someone together.
Love a good troll. Thank you, Casey. Earl, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's something still, really special about the platform in terms of, especially I think in like rapid response moments, how like everyone comes and like, wants to see what to do and so on. And so, both, in the unfortunate event where, RBG passed away and when, when the Dobbs decision leaked and so on, I mean, those were just a lot of people gathered, wanted to figure out what to do. And so if you kind of were ready to you had a good idea of something and could make it easy. I mean, Twitter, unlike Instagram, others, they make it so easy to put a link that you can track and that other people can retweet and all that kind of stuff in a way that, can really just catch fire. And so, I think back to some of those experiences where you can really redirect, whatever people are feeling into a positive thing, whether it be like, raising money for an underfunded cause and so on, that they probably wouldn't have been on their radar otherwise.
Thank you, Earl. Rashad?
I don't have really any specific memories on Twitter hashtags because there are just so many. And for me, it's pretty much blurred in over being on there for about 15 years or so. And there's obviously massive campaigns like I think about the campaigns in Kids in Cages during Trump era, families belong together, things like that. I mean, those are society changing campaigns, and in the obvious ones with BLM, with all the explosion around Ferguson, Twitter was massive. Twitter was massive in terms of Arab Spring in circa 2015. On the conversely, Twitter was bad in terms of pushing Brexit on the other side. That just opened up Pandora's box that turned out to be really dark. So I think Twitter was very, very powerful in that iteration because everyone being there. Now, am I sad that it's gone? Honestly, I'm not. I'm kind of excited to see what's going to be next, because I think it was time. I think it ran its course. In sports, Twitter is still really big in terms of hashtags. I think it was just a year and a half ago. There was massive movement in England and other places because a bunch of rich oligarchs decided to combine all the European leagues into one super league. So and it was massive protests that broke out everywhere because soccer fans took to Twitter. But it'll be interesting what's going to happen in 2024. I think it's going to be there. But I'm sure you all saw the report that came out about 10 days ago about Musk potentially doing a general paywall. I think that would be a potential breaking moment, like the rate limiting moment was a few months ago, because I just don't think people are going to pay $1 for the basic services on Twitter. I think that's going to have massive disruptions and probably even bigger migration to other platforms. But who knows? Musk sometimes make decisions like that and backtracks within 5 days because of pushback on Twitter. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting how it all plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure that we leave the folks tuning in with some really tangible, concrete recommendations. And I think I've heard one that everybody agrees with, but oh, Brad,
Yeah, to
go,
stop it
go
in real
ahead.
quick. Mershad, I know you had a heart out. Do you need to step out, my friend?
I could 12:55. That I will stretch it under 5 minutes.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Brad. And thanks, Michelle, for sticking around. So I think I've heard everybody agree, don't leave Twitter. Keep the handle, keep the audience, use it if it drives value for you. Anyone disagree with that statement? Okay, great. And then on the new platforms, everyone I think agrees, park your handles. And then otherwise, I think there's a lot of area for disagreement or different recommendations. I'd love to hear from everybody. We can keep the same order we're going with. Just in terms of like, how much time do you actually recommend folks spend on each of these platforms and what approach do you recommend they take? I will say my recommendation, which is your mileage may vary, but focus on, like what Mershad said a few minutes ago, is focus on the platforms where you really own the data and the ability to connect with your supporters. So SMS and email and other one-to-one communication tools where you own that audience is where I'd focus my capacity and kind of like let the social media landscape shake out a bit more before throwing a ton of time at it. That's my personal take. Alana, to you.
Sorry, yeah, that's very good advice. I would say that you need to look to see who is spending time on those platforms and what they want to do there. And that's something you can only learn by spending some time there yourself, because it's going to be different for the audiences that you want to engage with. And one of the things I saw that really struck me just yesterday was Alex Winter, who's become a documentary filmmaker, and his most recent documentary is about YouTube disinformation, was saying, I actually hope this place, in this case Blue Sky, doesn't become the place where people go to for everything. And I'm like, I hope it is, because that's the only way we're going to get in front of enough people. The reality is that there isn't a place where everything is, and so you're going to have to see by looking at it where your people are and what they're doing on those spaces. Because if all of their threads are about their cat, I don't know that you're going to be able to get in front of them about something policy related, but you might.
Go ahead, Casey.
So I would say I definitely agree with what Salim said about focusing on your owned channels. I think for me, I'm the director of social media and texting. So like texting got tacked on as texting became more and more important. And we are seeing more and more of our clients starting texting programs so that they can have that relationship with their supporters directly to their phones. So I think that's super important. I think just generally staying the course, I think we, are really hard on ourselves that we need to be on the next big thing. We need to be ahead of it. And I think we should give ourselves a little more grace that like, this is a lot. And these tools don't have scheduling capabilities. And there's a lot of API issues popping up with Twitter that are just making our jobs harder. And we're working with someone who is like an irrational maniac, to be kind. And I think that means that sometimes you can't be proactive. You have to be reactive and, parking the handles and taking the small steps to be prepared, and also building out your strategy on the other two of the big three are good steps to take, but like really we just have to take it day by day and see sort of what happens next.
Thanks, Casey. Over to you, Earl.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I mean, at the end of the day, our time is the most valuable resource. And I mean, let's not forget that social media generally makes people feel worse. For me, unless I have a real good reason, like my primary role, unlike maybe some people here, other people on the internet, isn't, communications. People aren't, I don't need to speak for a greater organization, other things like that. So for me, it's not as important to like be on all these until there's, maybe there's a certain rapid response moment or other things. And I mean, the good thing is, how many times have we seen like a account that has no following just, rise up the ranks in a certain moment where people are really looking for that voice? And I think there's still that opportunity, even if you haven't parked your handle and so on, to do that. So maybe that can make someone who feels anxious about having to be on all these platforms feel a little bit better.
Yeah, I will say a couple of things in terms of one more concrete recommendation that I would give is if you haven't done it yet, you should be downloading your archives from Twitter. You can do that from settings, especially if you have organization or your personal accounts where you've invested some time in recent years and their content or history that you may want to hold on to. I think it would be good practice to do that. I think it's fairly straightforward. You go to settings and then you follow through directions, and you can probably Google too, like in terms of how to download your archives from Twitter. And secondly, in terms of how to use social media, look, at the end of the day, it's really about the vision and plan you have for your organization or yourself. Like, what is it that you want to be? What is it that your organization or advocacy or campaign or whatever that you're pushing want to be in terms of your goals for the short term and the long term. And like everything, strategy always trump tactics. Twitter and all these other platforms are just tactical tools, and I don't think it really matters if you do not have an underlying strategy in place and vision in place. So I would work on that and then figure out in terms of what makes sense for you to how and engage where.
Thank you, Murshad. Brad, are you trying to close us out?
If you're ready to close out, well, we got to close out.
Yes, I think we are. I think that's like,
Yeah.
beautiful underscoring of the
Yeah, I'm
importance of
going to say
strategy.
thank you, Salim. I'm going to let you do as much of a closeout as you need to do. I'll throw the bomb in the end. I deleted my Twitter account with 30,000 followers because I just didn't want to fund Nazis. And like there were so many reasons I could have stayed and I couldn't do it. And I wasn't working at an organization. If I was still working at a political organization, it probably would have been a much harder conversation. I'm just partying over at LinkedIn. So thank you all. Thank you so much, Salim. I'll let you all finish wrapping it out, and I'll see folks in the next session.
Thank you, Brad. And yeah, obviously that's an important take, and some people definitely are taking a stand and closing out their accounts and don't want to discount the validity in doing that. But what Murshad said, like that's why Brad named it the Center for Digital Strategy. That has to underpin every decision we're making, and all of these platform choices are tactical ones. So with that, I am so grateful to Alana, Earl, Casey, and Murshad for sharing their brilliance and time. And if y'all want, no pressure, but you can leave the audience with one closing thought. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you for having me. So I gotta go, but it was so wonderful chatting with you. I think I learned a lot.
Thanks.
Talk to your members about where they are. Bye.
Spot on, Alana. Casey.
I just wanted to say thank you. This is super informative and a really great discussion. And yeah, just we'll hang in there. We're all in this together is my last closing thought.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's a great call. Thanks to all of you, and to the best outcomes possible in 2024.
Indeed. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.